Hey, you. Yeah, you. Watching this video. Let me ask you something. Are you a fan of retro games? Well, you're watching this channel, so I have to assume that you are. But let me ask you this. Are you a collector of retro games? Well, if you are, you might feel that it's sometimes difficult to find the games you're looking for. Even if you go to a store like GameStop, which has their GameStop Retro section, you can't always find specific games. Well, GameStop's trying to help out even further with that by entering into a new initiative that's going to bring even more classic old school games to their stores. But after looking at it, I gotta ask, is this what collectors are really interested in? All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and checking out this video. Of course, if this happens to be your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscription button, click the notification bell if you want to be notified every time I put up a new video, give this one a thumbs up, and leave a comment below if you want to be part of the conversation. So today, we're talking about collecting retro video games. And as some of you may be aware, over this past summer, GameStop started a new initiative that they call Gamestop Retro. This is where they set aside a certain section of their stores for retro games. Games, consoles, accessories, things like that. Now, you may have a store near you that's got a pretty big selection and a good number of classic games to choose from. Or you might be like me, where you've got a smaller store with one little corner that's designed for retro games. And I put that in quotes because most of the games still seem fairly newer, in terms of generation. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. Wii, maybe some Wii U, those kind of games in there. It's very hard to find. If you're a collector of older games, NES, Super NES, Genesis, Game Boy, things like that, still not very easy to find at these GameStops. Well, GameStop has now entered into a new agreement with Limited Run Games to bring some new NES, Super NES, Genesis, and Game Boy games to their stores. But like I said, I'm not sure if this is exactly what collectors want. So this article comes from Rant, and it says Limited Run Games is teaming up with GameStop to bring back retro titles. Sounds good, right? Now, heading down into the article, it says Limited Run Games is teaming up with GameStop Retro stores in the US starting this holiday season to release a number of classic console games. Known for selling limited physical copies of previously digital-only releases, Limited Run Games caters to those who prefer hard copies of their favorite titles. And that's true, and that's something that I do think that Limited Run Games is very good at. There are a lot of newer titles that are out that are designed with a retro feel to them, a modern retro feel to them, that are typically just digital downloads only, and Limited Run Games has partnered with the developers to release them on physical copy. Now, one game I can think of in particular is the new Rugrats Adventures in Gameland that came out recently. Now, that game, I have it on my PC. I actually got it free through Epic. And it is a lot of fun, and it's got two modes in the game. You can play in more of a modern look and feel to it, or you can play in a classic NES look to the game. Pixelated graphics, looks like it could have run on an NES very easily. As a matter of fact, that's what Limited Run Games has done. They've actually released a version of that game on an NES cartridge. You can actually play it in Nintendo NES hardware. Of course, you can't play the modern looking version of the game. It's going to look like like an NES game, but it's still pretty cool that they do things like that. But let's continue with the article. In August, GameStop announced that select stores around the country would begin offering customers a selection of classic consoles and games. From Sega Saturn and the original PlayStation to Dreamcast and 64, fans could expect to find physical versions of their favorite titles and the consoles they used to play them on at GameStop Retro locations. As more games are released as digital exclusives, fans' demand for physical media has started to increase, and a new partnership marks a step in the right direction for continued game preservation efforts. Limited Run Games has announced a new partnership with GameStop, with the popular distributor set to release physical copies of 16 classic games at select GameStop Retro locations this holiday season. While some of these titles were previously available to pre-order from Limited Run's website, more fans will now have a chance to snag a copy. As the company's name implies, each title will only be available in limited quantities, so interested buyers are asked to move quickly before they're gone for good. A little FOMO there, I guess. And here is a look at the particular titles that they plan on releasing, starting with A Boy and His Blob, Trouble on Blobonia from NES, Amazon Training Road, Doodle World Redrawn. You have Jurassic Park for Game Boy and Jurassic Park for Super Nintendo. You've got Jurassic Park 2, The Chaos Continues on Game Boy and Super Nintendo. You've got Kubo 3 on NES, Rendering Ranger R2 on Super NES, Tailgater for Game Boy, Tokitori for Game Boy Color, Trip World DX for Game Boy Color, Witch and Whiz for the original NES, Worms Gray and Pink variant for Game Boy, Black and Pink variant for Genesis, and Worms Armageddon for Game Boy Color. So I have to say, overall, it's a pretty interesting list. Now, some of these games I'm very familiar with. A Boy and His Blob, classic NES game. The Jurassic Park games are a lot of fun. The Worms games are a lot of fun. Some of those other ones I'm not super familiar with. Maybe some of you who, again, are collectors, maybe you're very familiar with some of these games. But it is an interesting list. So what's the problem? Why do I have an issue with this? Well, the way I think about it is this. If you're into collecting retro video games, you're probably in one of two camps. You might be like me, who only gets games that I'm interested in, that I feel like I want to play, or maybe want to just collect and have on my shelf. I'm not really interested in collecting to get like a full set or a whole bunch of different games, things like that. I basically just look for the games that I think are interesting, that I remember playing, back in the day, that I would want to play again, things like that. So for somebody like me, like if one of these titles, like if I was interested in A Boy and His Blob and I can't seem to find it anywhere, I might wind up picking this up. But then there's the other collectors, and you're the ones that I'm primarily talking to, and you're the ones that I really want to hear comments from after the video. Are you the type of collector who's interested in maybe getting a full set of NES games or Super NES, Game Boy games, things like that, or want to have these old school classic games that you had back in the day, the original version of these games? Is a reprint or a re-release something that you would want as part of your collection? Or are you only interested in getting the actual original game as it came out back in the 80s, back in the 90s, whenever it first came out? That's the real question, because these games coming to GameStop are not going to be the older versions of these games. They're going to be brand new re-releases that Limited Run Games is putting out. So is that what you want as part of your collection? For many years, I was a comic book collector. I still enjoy them. You can see I've got some graphic novels behind me for certain stories that I like, but I had a huge collection of original comic books. I had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 or 30 long boxes full. I sold them a few years ago. Once I started getting more into this hobby, collecting games, of having home arcades and things like that, I wanted to get rid of them so that I could have some money to start a new hobby. But back when I was collecting, I knew there was a difference between a first printing and a reprint when it came to collectability. Obviously, first print runs were going to wind up being worth more down the line than reprints were. Now, with video games, I know it can be a little bit different. There are some games that are rare, that are hard to find, that are worth quite a bit of money. And if you have those games, then you know their value. And then there are some games that, are just a certain price, and that's all they are. Now, I'm not as familiar with these particular games as to what their actual value is, the original. Maybe some of these are really rare and hard to find and go for hundreds of dollars. And maybe Limited Run Games putting them out for 20 or 30 bucks is a deal compared to that. But then if you're a collector, is that what you want? Do you want a reprint that isn't worth what the original was. If there's a game out there that's worth a couple of $100, but you find a really good deal on it and you can get it for a lot less and have it in your collection, that becomes more valuable than just some reprint or re-release that's released today as opposed to, again, 30-something years ago. So that's where I have to wonder, for you guys who are real retro game collectors, is this something you'd be interested in, or are you all about getting the games as they were back in the day? Now, again, for some of you who aren't big-time collectors, maybe you remember A Boy and His Blob, or you remember Jurassic Park on the Super Nintendo, and you're like, ooh, I would love to play that game again, and I can't find it anywhere. So to be able to go to a GameStop and pick up a new version of this game just to play, and again, think about this. It's a brand new version, so you've got less chance of there being, chip corrosion or anything like that that's going to make the game hard to play or not play at all. I'm sure it'll last longer because it's brand new. So there is that to consider as well. But again, if you're just a casual fan who likes to pick up the games that you want to play, then maybe this is not such a bad idea. But for you collectors out there, let me know what your thoughts are on limited run games coming out with brand new versions of older games. There you go. That's it. Just wanted to put this out there. Again, some of you may not be aware that GameStop and Limited Run Games was doing this, and maybe you have some interest in what they plan on releasing. Now you know to keep an eye out for GameStop Retro stores during the holiday season for these particular games. But again, for those of you who are the big-time collectors, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of this initiative, and is this something you would be interested to get these games to add to your collection? Well, that's all for now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave me a thumbs up. Keep those comments coming. Of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that as well. And if you want to support the channel even further, you could consider getting a membership. That's all for this one. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care and happy gaming.